Today we're focusing on the long range meta, and I'm going to be giving you a ton of different options to choose from, regardless if you play Rebirth or Caldera. So I know this is a lot of numbers. We're not going to go ahead and go over all of them. I will just go ahead and explain how I come up with the individual common TTK, because I think this is where a lot of times people struggle with, especially when they're looking at sites like Sim, where they focus on just the chest shot, or they're on true game data, but they're not using the optimization tool to actually figure out the shot placement to give you a practical TTK. So that's kind of what I do here manually. And right here, just as an example, I have the STG meta with Vital and without Vital. If you'll notice here, it's typically going to be 11 shots to kill. You get one chest shot. With Vital, it will lower that TTK to 940 instead of the 1034 that we see above it. When we go over here on the standard build without the Vital, it's 2 chest shots, which I think is still pretty practical. And that's why I said it doesn't really do much. It does maybe later on where you need 8 chest shots. If you get a couple more chest shots, maybe you only need 3 headshots instead of 4. But in the practicality sense, it's not really helping you, especially since Vital hurts your recoil. It'll make it harder for you to hit those shots. So you have to go ahead and factor in so many different things when you're looking at TTK. And it's not just the TTK. It could be the recoil, ADS speed, rate of fire, mobility, bullet velocity, reload speed, damage per mag. How big is the mag? Is it easy to use? Does the gun feel good, right? There's a lot of different things you got to look at. And that's kind of generally what I do here with all of these weapons we're including on the list. I kind of have the green areas where it's a likely TTK, and then there is a yellow where maybe if you got a little bit lucky, you can get that, but it's going to be rarer. The most common TTKs are going to be in green, and you can see I've done them for a lot of different weapons. And then that brings us to a long list with all these weapons. I did leave a few off, but there are a lot on here, and even a couple that are here multiple times. Like we have the AS44 with the 40 mag versus a 60, the Fin Adverse Barrel, which helps rate of fire and TTK, but damages the bullet velocity. Or we can go with the Fin Advantage, which a lot of people gas up, which has better bullet velocity, slower rate of fire, and the TTK is nothing special. And what we'll notice here is if you kind of look through all of this, sorted at common TTK is not always the most important step, because it really comes down to the user if you're able to hit those shots. And I'll give you a stupid example because it is an example, but if you use the Vanguard 1911, it has a rapid fire trigger, a 24 round mag, and an automatic firing barrel that makes it fully auto with an 1000 RPM. Its damage per mag is 710, muzzle velocity is 300, and its common TTK is 649 at infinite range. This is even at like 100 meters. This gun, if you manage to land all the bullets, could kill in 649. But that's not practical. It's like super stupid to use. The guns like this in your hand, it is not going to be a very viable gun for long range. So there will be people that will even comment, they didn't make it to this part where I'm explaining that TTK is not everything. It is important, but it's very important to really factor in the realistic TTK, and then based off your skill level, how close are you to getting to that theoretical TTK? And if it happens more often using one gun over another, you'll probably gravitate towards that. That's why there are guns like the Kilo are still heavily used, because they're super easy to use, especially for mid to lower skilled players, at least until they improve to the point where they can diversify. And if they're really good, especially on keyboard and mouse, maybe use the RAM, which is disgusting. But then you run into another issue, especially with more health. The damage per mag really comes into the equation. This damage per mag is an assumption that you are landing 100% of your shot, which doesn't really happen all that much. Even at close ranges, you can miss shots with SMGs. We're talking about 80 to 100 meters where you're expected to use these individual weapons at long range. Some people will struggle more than others. Normally, most weapons that are meta for Caldera or Verdansk were weapons that you can usually hit straight shots around 100 to 120-ish meters. Beyond that, maybe if you're a little bit more skilled, but in general, that's the target range you're looking for. When it comes to Rebirth Island, usually it's around 70 to 90 meters because the sight lines just aren't that long. Even though there are occasions where you could be on top prison and try and shoot somebody over at the stronghold, but that's not really all that practical. They're normally gonna be sniping. You're likely to put yourself in a bad situation. So you gotta factor in all those different variables. And based off of this, you can kind of see what is viable because it's on the list. It's definitely viable TTKs. And kind of the closest one that is quote unquote in the meta is the Automaton or Automaton, depending on how you say that. And it has an 1,000 common TTK, which is not great. And it does have a slightly faster viable TTK if maybe you get an extra headshot in the mix there where it can get lower. In general, these other ones that don't have this yes next to them, that's pretty much their TTK. As long as you hit the shots, that's like what you're going to get 99% of the time, unless you just get lucky or somebody's low health or whatever the case is. So based off of that, I would highly recommend considering a lot of weapons that are on this list. And if you're looking for a modern warfare weapon, usually monolithic suppressor, longest barrel, biggest mag, commando foregrip, and the VLK optic, or holographic if you're on console. When it comes to the Cold War guns, like we have the Grab on here. A lot of people ask, well, what about the Grab? The Grab is one of those guns that excels more as a sniper support. It's pretty good, up to about 80-ish meters in terms of recoil. And then trying to beam someone at 120 gets a little bit more challenging. So depending on your skill, that could be great for you on Rebirth Island, but then it might suck on Caldera, despite it having a really good TTK of 880 milliseconds. So when it comes to the Cold War long range setups, normally you do agency suppressor or the monolithic suppressor equivalent. You do the last barrel, you do the grip that helps with the horizontal and vertical recoil, biggest mag, 3x optic, or a holographic if you're on console. And that's pretty much the build. Obviously with Vanguard, it gets a little bit tricky, which mag, which barrel, and you kind of got to figure it out there. But now we'll go ahead and go over a couple different loadouts to kind of help you along the way. So there's a few in here. Obviously, like I said, there's tons that I can include on this list, but a 45 weapon loadout video doesn't really work. So we'll go ahead and start off one that's kind of still slept on, super low recoil, super easy to use. This is a Cold War LMG. LMGs don't really make it in the list. They do have an open bolt delay often that impacts the TTK and has a delay every time you release the trigger. So a lot of times LMGs are supposed to be pray and spray, a little bit slower mobility, slow reload, which doesn't always fit people's play style when they're playing the game. So this one's pretty good. I would recommend trying it out. GRU Task Force Spetsnaz 120, or you can get a faster aim down sight by going the Serpent and then go with the 3X or a holographic. And that's kind of how I build that one out. One that is a little bit of a sleeper, you don't even need to max level it to try out the max level build, and that is the Whitley. The Whitley kind of shoots straight. It does definitely have a little bit slower aim down sight and mobility because it is an LMG, but the reload is still pretty quick and allows you to get in and out. Unlike like the PKM, which is also disgusting, or the Bruin, but they're not, they have handicaps in one way or another that are holding them back from competing with something like the Whitley, which also shoots straight. MX silencer, the Gracie MK9, the hand stop, or you could even go Carver. Really depends on your preference on that one. 45 round mag, which is the first one, not the 30-06 rounds. We're talking about this specific one up here, and that gives you the realistic TTKs with lengthen, hatched, hard scope, on hand, the CGC R4. This one you can actually go polymer. I didn't have it unlocked, but you can go ahead and go that way if you want to help with the sustained fire. This one you definitely notice it gets a little bit harder to hit the shots because the bullet velocity right around 90 meters. So this one's pretty good if you can understand the ranges, or a Rebirth weapon, it is very good. That brings us to the Cooper, which is one of those lower skilled guns where it shoots super straight, fast fire rate, so it's forgiving, hardly moves, but it kind of has two weaknesses, which is the damage per mag and bullet velocity. So in modes like solos or duos, this one's a really good option. Trios can get a little tricky if you got to take on multiple teams, but the bullet velocity will struggle on Caldera at really long ranges compared to some of these other weapons that are going to be a little bit higher up on the list. So that's the main thing holding it back. So for the build, we have the MX silencer, Cooper custom, the 3-6X or 2.5, Cooper 45W, tight grip, fully loaded, or one of these other ones on hand. Does speed up the aim down sight slightly. We got polymer grip, 60 round mag, lengthen, and then hand stop. And that's kind of the build you would go with. But keep it in mind that it does have its weakness, so you really want to keep your engagements below about 75, 80 meters. Definitely a Rebirth, better on Rebirth than is Caldera, but good either way. As long as you're hitting your shots, that is the key. Long range Automaton. This one is still pretty good. It does have a really slow TTK, but it checks all the other boxes. It has a really easy to use, bullet velocity is solid, damage per mag is decent because you get 75 bullets. If it was 60 round, would not almost be viable. It would be on that low on the list. But overall, it fits in there because it's still really easy to use. So the class setup: MX silencer, the ZAC 600, 2.5 to 3.6, Anastasia padded, tight grip on hand polymer, 75 round lengthened hand stop, and or carver, how you want to build that out. So now we're moving up the list, and some of these aren't going to surprise anyone. I highly recommend unlocking the Vargo if you haven't had a chance to use the Vargo yet, because it is basically the XM4, especially after the buffs and nerfs that offset them. It's pretty much the XM4, but slightly better than it was, with a little bit worse mobility in terms of aim down sight. But overall, at range, you don't really need the fastest aim down sight. So I recommend trying this one out. Again, this one's a laser beam. The class setup for that is going to be GRU Task Force Spetsnaz 60 round 3X. And then the XM4, they keep trying to nerf it, but its fire rate and so many other things allow it to still be competitive based off the forgivability. It's still okay kind of as a sniper support. Not necessarily point blank against an SMG, but it does really well everywhere else. Still a good go-to, same build we've been using for a while. Agency Task Force, Field Agent, 60 round, and then the 3X. You could still use the 45 in solos or duos or something like that, but I think 60 is definitely comfortable in terms of damage per mag. And that brings us to the Meta Chasers area, which this is no surprise to anyone. Everyone's build is going to be slightly different. We're going to have like 4 different bar builds when we get into the bar, and then we'll have our STG, which will have like 2 to 3 different builds depending on how you want to build it. When it comes to the bar, it is nasty after all the buffs, super easy to use, and there's a certain combination that gives you the appropriate fire rate. There are other builds that still have decent TTKs, but they will come with bigger drawbacks, and you kind of have to weigh that out based off your playstyle and how you want to use the weapon. Overall, super easy to use. I think the STG is slightly easier, but that's kind of how it goes. For this, we're using the MX silencer, the XL barrel, 2.5 to 3.6x. We're using the pistol grip custom, hard scope on hand, stippled, lengthened, 40 round Clouser, which is the second mag, and then we're using the Carver foregrip or using hand stop. That is one build, and this one's probably the one that I would primarily use if you're on Caldera. If you are playing Rebirth, you can actually get away with only using a recoil booster. This won't hurt the recoil as much as you would think just because of slow fire rate. Then you can also go to subsonic, and even though the bullet velocity will be kind of bad in general, you'll just have to make sure instead of challenging people at like 130 meters that you bring it down to like 70 meters, and you should still be pretty fine and have a very good TTK. The other thing you can do is still keep the other build, go that route, you stay off the minimap, but the stock, you can actually change it. And then there's a strafe stock in here, which is the remove stock. This one will allow you to strafe faster. If you want to have a little bit more mobility, if you'd like to play a little bit faster, just keep in mind that it will hurt the recoil. So that's a little bit more of a higher skill build, I would say. But that gives you a few different options to kind of go and build it how you want and try and experiment with it. Overall, I think the rapid fire is going to be a little bit higher skill, but this one gets the job done. Then that brings us to the STG, which we talked about right at the beginning. We got the MX silencer, the 760mm, hand stop, Gorenko 50 lengthened polymer, nerves of steel, fully loaded, and then the weighted. And the reason we're using this is although Vital will take one less shot to the chest, it goes from 2 down to 1. So it's not going to help you as often as you would think to have worse recoil and accuracy. For long range weapons, you just generally do not want that. The extra damage might not be worth the extra missing shots. So go ahead and take that how you will. But in general, you get more out of using sleight of hand, especially since it's only a 50 round mag. You can kind of make up for all of its weaknesses. And this would be the jack of all trades. Even though it doesn't specialize in anything, it is very good at a lot of things. So it allows it to be the meta. Appreciate the support. If you liked it, hit the like button. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.